it first. And we've got 3 Apollo missions in beautiful detail. If anyone ever thought that we didn't go to the moon, well, they haven't seen this website. And I won't go into detail about this because I know Ben is going to explain so many things. But it's a great pleasure to welcome Ben and everyone else to this very special conference. I'll introduce Ben now. Ben Feist is a data visualization software engineer at NASA's Johnson Space Center, that's in Houston, and where he's designing and building the systems that will enable humanity to return to the moon. And Ben's work at NASA has been recognized by many awards, including the Johnson Space Center Software Excellence Award, and he's been nominated for many awards, including the Innovation Award and Major Space Act Award. How did Ben get to work at NASA? For me, that's one of the most interesting things about Ben. It's a very unique story. He was working in the private sector, and he spent his evenings and weekends for 9 years on a personal project that eventually got NASA's attention, and they invited him to work there. And he's documented in such a beautiful way 3 of the NASA missions on the Apollo in Real Time website, including astronauts who were some of his biggest fans. When they found out what he had done, they couldn't believe that he wasn't already working for NASA. So when NASA saw the work, they just hired him. Well, it took a few years, but he did get hired. And I won't list all of the many awards that Ben has earned for his fantastic work. Talking about Apollo in Real Time, it's an interactive multimedia website that presents the Apollo 11, 13, and Apollo 17 missions as they happened. He compiled and synchronized thousands of hours of audio and video recordings, transcripts, and photographs, and brought them all together so that we could relive every moment of these missions. And Ben created the Apollo 11 and 17 sites while he was still a contractor. And by the time he created Apollo 13, he was already, Ben can explain that better, the sequence of events, but it took a long time. There's a magazine called Air and Space, and it describes the Apollo 13 site as one of the most ambitious multimedia history sites ever created. And it's one amazing website. And I remember the first time I saw it, I was in Calgary, my hometown, at the big Science Museum. And it was for the celebrations of the Apollo 50th anniversary. And they had his website screened on a huge wall in the main common area of the museum. And I just sat down, scratching my head, looking at this amazing thing, and I couldn't believe it. And the complexity of the design just blew me away, which I'm sure will impress you guys too. Ben was also part of the team behind the amazing Apollo 11 IMAX film. If you guys have ever seen an IMAX movie, the really big ones, yeah. And he won 3 Emmy Awards with his team for that. And this is another one that really impresses me. Ben was a member of the historic Apollo Mission Control Restoration Team. So what does that mean? Well, basically, there's the original mission control that they used to launch, the astronauts to the moon. And it was getting a little bit kind of old and deteriorated over the years, but Ben and his team restored it. So it is exactly the same and perfected and beautified, but exactly the same as it was back in the 1960s, even cups of coffee and, cigarette butts and stuff like that. Because believe it or not, people actually sat there smoking, in mission control. It's hard to believe, right? And I visited the center a year before it was restored, and then a few months after, and it was absolutely fantastic. So if you ever get to go to Johnson Space Center, please take that tram tour, and you'll feel like you're going through a time machine back into the 1960s. So with that, You can see I'm obviously a huge fan of Ben. If that hasn't come through, I'm sorry. And welcome, Ben. Thank you for taking your time to speak to the students from all over the world. I know there's a lot of great questions, and everyone enjoy your time with Ben Feist. Thank you.
Thanks very much. That's a very warm introduction. When you put everything together like that, it doesn't feel like I've achieved all those things as I go, because I just take every day, one day at a time, and work on things that I think are fun. And it's great when it adds up to an introduction like yours. I don't know if you want me to just say a few words about my background and what I do, but I can do that so that everybody here understands a little bit about me. Is that what you'd like me to do?
I think that would be great.
That'd
Okay,
be great. Yeah.
sure. So I'm a computer programmer, really. That's it. I did this when I was a kid, probably the same age that many of you are. Computers were quite different back then, but I found it was really interesting that I could make these machines do things that I wanted just by learning how they worked and making programs. And they were really simple programs. And then, as it's like a lot of things. It's like playing the piano. If you hear somebody who's really good at playing the piano, it sounds like an impossible thing to learn. But if you were to take lessons every week and you practice one bit at a time, you'd realize that every day it's challenging, but it's not as impossible as it seems when you hear somebody really good. So I treat computer programming kind of the same way, because you see something like Apollo in real time, which is the end result of a huge amount of work. And I did not know how to build it when I started. I just started learning one bit at a time and broke the problems down into little problems that I could solve. And then I'd put those in place, and then I wouldn't like how it worked, and I'd do it again. It was a lot of back and forth, and then it resulted in something that is now Bruce's favorite website. But I think it's important for everybody to realize that I didn't just snap my fingers and I'm like some kind of computer science genius and I just made this happen. I Googled my way through it just like anybody else would when you're trying to learn how to do something for the first time. And so that as a computer programmer, doing that when I was young, I did more programming in high school. Then you can learn more about the actual theory behind computers. And when you've done a bit of programming and you kind of learn how to make things happen, then when you go and actually learn the rules around why that works, it makes everything else easier. It's like, how to speak English, but until you take English literature and you learn grammar, you don't really know why those sentences work the way they do. So I really enjoyed learning about computer science in school, and I took it in university. And then I started building essentially websites when the internet was brand new. And I spent years and years building websites for different companies and clients. And that's what I did during the day, every day. That was my job. And as Bruce mentioned, on evenings and weekends, just for fun, I worked on Apollo in real time because I really liked working with the historical mission material and built what you can see if you go to that website. Then now the building of Apollo in real time is a longer story, so I don't know if we want to jump straight into that, but that's my background and what makes me tick.
Cool. We have a couple questions already. Maybe we can start with a couple questions and then we can go on to the website.
Sure.
Bruce, you want to call someone?
Okay. How about Kareem? Go ahead, Kareem.
Okay, 2 questions. Is the Lightspeed engine in development?
No, there's no such thing as a Lightspeed engine. That would be nice if there was, and we'd be able to go pretty fast.
They said in JPL that they're trying to work on an engine that can go 99.99% light speed.
Well, sure, any engine, if you run it for long enough, will make you go faster and faster. And if you run it for a very long time, you can get to 99.9%, but you could never get to light speed.
I know, because matter cannot get to light speed.
That's right. See, if you, and even at 99.9%, I think you weigh an awful lot by that point. And if you, as you might know, if you get all the way to light speed, you weigh an infinite amount, which means you can't possibly ever get there. But there's a lot of development for different propulsion systems that will let us travel throughout the solar system a lot more efficiently than we do now. And those kinds of systems are very important if we're ever going to live on other planets like Mars. Right now, it takes a huge amount of fuel to get to Mars, and it's hard to think about it, but it takes just as much fuel to slow down when you get to Mars as it does to speed up to get there. So you're carrying a huge amount of fuel with you when you go. So any other systems where that's more efficient or you need less fuel are very valuable, and there's a lot of research going on to try to find them.
One more. Is a warp drive, some sort of warp drive possible?
Warp drive? Is that what you said?
Yep.
No, not possible with our understanding of physics and how everything works in the universe today. That is not something that we can do. We can't, there is no evidence that there's any solution to traveling faster than light. And things like, we get used to ideas like warp drive because they're in a lot of science fiction. And it would be pretty boring science fiction stories if the TV show was just about traveling somewhere forever and never getting there. So the writers make up ways to get there so they can tell the story, right? But it's easy if you're making up a fiction story, you can just say that there's such thing as warp drive. But to make it really happen, right now we're not showing any indication that could happen.
Okay. Because I thought NASA said that a warp drive was possible, like from bending space-time in front of them below and then bending space-time behind them up.
Yeah, that's a very interesting idea. That could possibly be a type of propulsion, but I think even if you warped space-time, that doesn't allow you to break the light speed limit. So there's probably interesting research on how you could do that, but also we don't know of any way to bend space-time other than just have a huge amount of mass, like the size of a star around. So that's, again, we're into the science fiction area to say that could happen.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Great
Thanks,
questions.
Kareem. Very good. Chris, you have a question for us? Go ahead, Chris. Chris, can you unmute?
Yeah.
Oh, there you
I
go.
couldn't for a second. Yeah, so do you think that we could actually go to Mars anytime soon? Because I know that Stephen Hawking, he did say that like some kind of theory, and then like we could like kind of like launch some kind of like spacecraft without like, I don't think without humans. I mean without humans, and then like probably like that kind of speed. Like,
Well, Mars is pretty close by if you're well, it's not close by, but on the measure of stars and other things that would require things like light speed travel, Mars is very close. It's only about, I think it's 8 light minutes away when we're on the same side of the sun, and it's about, if I get this right, 25 minutes away. Is that right? 20 minutes away if we're on the other side of the sun from Mars. That's how long it takes light to travel, and it takes us, with a conventional rocket, it would take us about 2.5 years to go there and back, and we would only get to spend 50 days there. And that's with the current orbits and the current technology we have with rockets. And they are under development right now. We want to go to Mars. We want to bring people to Mars and learn how to live there, because we need to learn how to live on other planets as we grow as the human species.
yeah, also, like, do you think that we can actually, instead of like 99.9%, I mean, like, of light speed, do you think we could go like 60% or 70% or something lower?
Even that, right now, we're not even close to having something like that. I mean, you might be able to get to that if you ran an engine for long enough over decades to get to another star, for example, but it it would be impractical to use that kind of speed in the solar system, because like I said, you have to spend just as much time slowing down as you spent speeding up, because there's nothing to slow you down.
Yeah, so I guess like the best solution for this situation is probably cryostasis, actually, because you're frozen and then you can be frozen for like long periods of time. I know it's not like in our current technology, but in probably the near future, like in the 2100s or 2200,
Well,
it could be.
there's research happening to try to understand how animals hibernate, for example. And if we know how hibernation works, then we could look into how we could make that happen in a human. But right now, we have no ability to do that.
Yeah, and also I know the flaw of it is like kind of ethical. I mean, like, why would someone want to be like frozen for 100 years? Like,
Well,
I mean,
the
100
ethical,
years, the human race could be extinct by then.
even if you weren't frozen, if you travel near the speed of light, time shifts, so that what seems like a day to you is years someplace else where they're not traveling at that same velocity. So you wind up with these weird things where it felt like you didn't take long to get to where you were going, but to the people back on Earth, it took a very, very long time for you to go to where you were going. This is very advanced stuff you guys are touching on here. That's beyond my lunar systems that I'm building for Artemis, which is way easier than learning how to travel to other stars. We're just going to learn how to camp in our backyard on the moon.
Yeah, so these are like really awesome questions. We can probably talk about them forever. I just want to emphasize again that we're going to limit to one question per person, and then as soon as you finish asking questions, we will mute you, because we have lots of people asking questions, wanting to ask questions, and we also have want to have Ben show more of the the cool stuff that he has built. So maybe we'll go with one more person, Yusuf, and then we're going to go have Ben show the website, and then we'll have a lot more questions for Q&A. Go ahead, Yusuf.
Hi.
Hello.
So my question is, I heard about like SpaceX and Elon Musk, and like how he's planning to go to Mars and build a space colony and stuff like that. And I think it's possible because he's like the richest person on the planet. But I don't know if it's like the right thing to do, because like, why should we go to like another planet when we have Earth and we're not even using all of Earth as space? And people are complaining about not having enough space on Earth to live, when there's literally I think at least we didn't like take all the space on Earth. Like, why is going to Mars our main priority?
That's a great question. I don't think going to Mars is our main priority. I'd say that humanity's main priority is to figure out how to live on Earth in a sustainable way, and that means environmental problems. And like you said, we're taking up more and more space on Earth. We haven't used it all yet. But at the same time, we're trying to make things better on Earth so that we can stay here and not ruin the place while we're living here. We do need to learn to live in other places too. And the reason for that is, even if we take excellent care of the Earth and we all snapped our fingers and there are no more environmental problems and stuff, there is still a chance that something could happen from outside Earth that would cause lots of people to die on Earth. So if you live in different places like the moon and you live on Mars, then there's going to be people left when something terrible happens. There's not very fun stuff to think of, and these terrible things are very unlikely, but they still exist. And the old saying is, don't have all your eggs in one basket, because if you drop the basket, you break all your eggs. Well, right now, all of humanity's eggs are in one basket, and that's the Earth. So we're really just one of the big reasons to go, and it's not a priority. Like I said, the priority is to learn to live here properly. But it is something that we should do in addition, and that's the big reason to go to Mars.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to pause on Q&A a little bit. You guys don't need to lower your hand. Maybe Ben, you can just show us the website a little bit. While Ben is
Sure.
bringing up the website, I'm going to ask you guys one trivia question about Apollo and see who are the 5 people that answer it first. Like, which year was the mission for Apollo 11?
Ooh, good
Type in
question.
chat. Okay, I open it for all, so you can answer to all. I have got 1968. You guys get more in 1968? Okay, 60, so we are mostly hanging around 60, 68, 60, 65, 70, 69, 69. Okay. You want to give the answer, Ben?
Which mission did you ask for
Apollo
again?
11.
Apollo 11 happened in July of 1969.
Yes, it's on the website.
But 1968, hey, that was a good year too. We did some missions then, well, we did the first trip around the moon in 1968, and then we continued going to the moon until 1972 on Apollo 17. So we were really only going to the moon for 3.5 years. It's kind of funny to think about it. It's this very special period in in the late 60s, early 70s that we were going to the moon, and now we're finally going back.
If you don't mind, maybe Ben, you can kind of walk us through this website a little bit, like how people can use it, maybe highlight some interesting moment in the mission.
Sure. Well, I mean, every moment is interesting, of course, including when they were sleeping, which is all in here. So, we could go and listen to the crew sleep and listen to mission control being tired on shift. Yeah, so this is the homepage, and as Bruce said, I've only done 3 of the Apollo missions. That's a common question that I get is, this is really great, but what about my favorite mission? And it's another mission. There is another one coming. Very slow progress on it. This Apollo 16, the second last mission. But there's lots more to do, and it's going to take a lifetime to get them all done. I can talk a bit about, since some of you have been taking computer science classes, I can talk about the technologies that are on this website. Some of the data processing was done using Python, and it's just taking like one text file and turning it into another text file. It's doing that kind of work. And it's something that I run once and then publish the results onto the website. And the whole rest of the website is written in JavaScript and HTML and CSS. So everything that happens on this website is happening in the browser, and is really unbelievably amazing to me still, as somebody who's been doing computer science for a long time, that the browser is capable enough to literally load an entire Apollo mission and play it back. It's even more capable than that. But I was, I didn't know how else to do it. And I said, well, what if I tried loading the whole thing? And I thought to myself, this will never work. And it worked. So that's how it works. Like I said, I'm Googling my way through this and trying to figure out what's going to work. So I did Apollo 17 first. So maybe I'll open that one first just to show you what this whole thing's all about. So this is the home screen, and it's just introducing this thing. It's simple. It only has 2 buttons. So the idea here was, don't make something really complex that people have to read a manual to learn how to use. Just make it really simple. So if once it runs, which I will do in a second here, actually, I'll just let it run. Once it runs,
all propellants now aboard the second stage, pressurized.
It will run by itself, and you don't have to do anything. It's just playing now. So this is another lesson when I was making a complicated thing like this interface, is don't make it so that you have to learn how it works. Instead, make it work. And then if people explore and try pressing buttons and try doing different things, they'll start to learn that it can do things, and it'll reward them for exploring those things. So anybody can receive a link, and they open it, and the thing starts playing, and they can just be hands off. And you can see here the transcript of what people are saying on the bottom left is scrolling along as people talk. All the video footage that's available from the historical missions is at the top left. And every photo that was taken of the mission and on the mission appears here on the right when it was taken. So the whole concept of this thing is you're riding along exactly, in this case, almost exactly 50 years ago. You can see it was December 7th, 1972 at just after midnight. And that's when the rocket lit and took off. At the only night launch of an Apollo rocket, which was very, very cool at the time. They said it was almost as bright as the sun to the people watching. So it's going to play now, and you're used to watching clips of a rocket launching, and then the clip's over, like on YouTube. But this will now play. If we let this continue to play, this is going to play all the way until many days later, until they splash down and are being recovered on the aircraft carrier that recovered them. There, the mission's over, and now it's December 19th, 1972. So you can see it's a very long process. And this scroll bar at the top here is the whole mission. You can see it takes them this long to get to the moon, and then they descend, and they are on the surface for 3 days. And then they come back up and do experiments in lunar orbit. Then they return back home and they splash down. That was Apollo 17 mission. And then these other two bars here are just magnification of that top bar. So if I jump to the surface, then here they are walking around on the surface. And I had to come up with some way to show when things happen. So that's what all these different ticks are and stuff. These little short ticks are every time a sentence is spoken. The green ticks means a photograph was taken. The blue line means that there's video coverage, because there's periods where there's no video coverage, like we go over here. Now they're just talking, and it's only audio that you can hear, because they turn the camera off. So here's an example. They get back to the lunar module, and they park the rover, and the camera was on the rover, and they couldn't run the camera when the rover was moving. So after they parked, they'd flip the power switch, and this umbrella antenna that you can see on the right here transmitted the TV signal back to Earth. They always pointed this antenna at the Earth. They could see the Earth in the sky, kind of aimed the antenna at it, turned on the transmitter, and this is it. This is what they were sending out. You can see he's walking in front of the camera. So this is how it works. It's just going to play and show you things that happened. I tried to also make it put some kind of index in place, so that at least if you go to milestones here, it's like a table of contents for different, what I thought were important parts of the mission. And then this is really cool. This is the post-mission commentary. So about 20 years after the mission happened, the two astronauts who were on the surface sat down and watched a lot of this footage, and someone recorded everything they said and transcribed it. And so this is like the director's commentary of the movie kind of thing, where you can actually read what the crew thought about what was happening at this time, not just what was happening at this time. So this is all, everything you can see here is all JavaScript. This is a web browser. I can select here, and you can see it's just HTML. I won't dig into the source code, because that's beyond the scope of this conversation. But this is essentially just a CSS layout with HTML and JavaScript driving what is happening on the actual website. The one special part is this bar thing at the top. You can see it behaves differently than anything you've probably seen on the web. It's written in something called Paper.js, which is written in JavaScript. But this is all happening in an HTML canvas. And a canvas allows you to draw. So I'm drawing rectangles, and I'm drawing these ticks, and I'm drawing words. I'm not, it's not HTML. So there's just one element here, and it is all the stuff inside here. And you can see how fast the canvas is when you tell it to do things. I just can't get over how fast my very inefficient code can be rendered as you scroll back and forth.
Very cool.
And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, it's really cool and how powerful that browser has become. I listened to a podcast like, this week of someone else interviewing you, and I think you had mentioned there a little bit about how when you first started doing this project, you were kind of using very different technologies back then. I guess
Yes.
have changed quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when I first started thinking about how to use this project was about 20 years ago. So the option was do a CD-ROM and use a really old multimedia program called Macromedia Director. And I just could, I could not imagine, like if you took all the data that's in this website and put it on CD-ROMs, I think I did the math once that it would be about 45 CD-ROMs in size. So it was clearly way beyond, like the idea was way too big for the technology at the time, but I still couldn't get away from this idea of how cool it was to listen to the crew talk while you also read the words, especially with the technical, difficult to understand things that they're saying, because they're using very technical language here, talking to mission control, and you have the opportunity here to better understand what they're saying by reading along. So that was really the idea. And, who would have thought you could upload 8-hour-long videos to YouTube? So this is, I think, 39 8-hour-long videos that are these things here this is YouTube in the middle, in the top left, playing this back for me. So I used YouTube basically because I didn't want to have to pay for video streaming. So if they let me do it, tried uploading it, it worked, and I made the program, and it's been working now since 2015 that I launched this thing. So I'm waiting to get a letter from Google saying, hey, what are you doing with this YouTube thing here? But they haven't bothered me yet.
Well, just tell them to sponsor it if they
That's right.
reach out to you. That's really cool. So I already posted the site in the chat, so you guys can all go play it. I'm going to actually lower everyone's hands a little bit, but if you have questions specifically about this website or Apollo 11s or any of these missions, you can raise your hand. And later on, we're going to open up questions for other type of questions as well. But since we're on this website, while you guys are playing with it, you can ask questions about this website. We're going to prioritize people who haven't asked questions before. And I do have another student who sent in actually a question ahead of time already. And his question, Liam had this question like, what took the picture or video of the ship in space? Was there like a satellite or something like following the ship while it's like going to the moon or coming back?
Well, they took pictures of each, so it depends what part of the mission you're wondering about. But if you go to some of these earlier, like when they first got into orbit and they're about to do translunar injection. I think that's so that's a part of the ship that was taken from the command module. And you can see the Earth's getting further and further away as they leave. So they've lit the rocket to head towards the moon, and you can see here that they've got a picture of the lunar module they're about to dock with. So all these pictures were taken out the window of the command module. So any picture you have of something from Apollo was taken from another Apollo spacecraft. It came apart into pieces that reconnected with each other and stuff. And there's no one in here yet, but later on, so you can see they dock, they're getting closer and closer. They dock with it. And then when they look out the window, you can see it's docked. So that's the lunar module. And then there's the empty container, which is the third stage of the rocket, still out there. And this was basically waste material. They didn't need this anymore. So there's all these pictures of this thing, which they're not going to use. This has just got them on the way to the moon. That's what this was for. And they didn't need it anymore, so they let it go. They then actually crashed this into the moon deliberately so that it would make a crater, and all the different seismographs on the moon that detect moonquakes would vibrate, and they could figure out from the impact what the interior of the moon was made of. And this is all part of the scientific investigation that they were doing during Apollo. So sorry, that's a long answer, and I'm now giving you more than you asked.
That's very cool. We're going to have like sort of like answer some questions here. Bruce, you want to go through the list of people who just raised hand? Hopefully everyone has questions about this website or Apollo.
Sure. Let's go with Tara. Would you like to ask your question, Tara?
Yeah, how do you take pictures of far away like galaxies, exoplanets? Because
Sorry.
they're so far away.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble understanding you. Could you get a little closer to the microphone?
How do we take pictures of galaxies or exoplanets? Because they're so far away, we can't get there.
Yeah, that's a great question. So galaxies, it's somewhat easy to take a picture of. You could do it with a telescope in your backyard. You just let enough light come in to gather that you can then see it, what you normally can't see with your eye. So it's just a matter of gathering light. That's how they take pictures of galaxies. Exoplanets is way harder. So exoplanets, there is actually no picture of an exoplanet. All they have done is detected that exoplanets must exist because they can detect other things. Like, for example, they measure the brightness of a star and they can watch that star get dimmer as a planet moves in front of it between us and the star. And they can show that that dimming is happening periodically, and they can show that there must be a planet there that's about this size and at about this orbit. And that's what we know about exoplanets.
Okay, great. Tanvi, would you like to ask a question? Tanvi. Go ahead, Tanvi.
We're not hearing you, even though it looks like you're unmuted. Maybe we'll go someone else first and see if he
Okay.
can fix that.
Okay, Lucas. Lucas, do you have a question?
Hello. Will you do something like this for SpaceX, or are you going to stay with what you did, with what you're doing now?
I would love to do something like this for SpaceX. They haven't called me yet, though.
Oh, that's a little sad.
But you know, I do work at NASA, and we are going to do something like this for Artemis, which SpaceX is building the human landing system for Artemis. So
I see.
as NASA gets that data from SpaceX, it'll become part of what could be ingested to a system like this. And that's kind of what I'm working on internally at NASA. But I'm making it for flight controllers to use so that during the mission, they can study what's going on more easily by jumping back in time and looking at the data. So I've done that since I started at NASA for all the ISS data. So they have the ability to go back and look at things that happened on ISS all the way back to 2013 through it's not called ISS in real time, but it totally should be, but it's not called that, through this internal system. And that's gonna expand into Artemis. Now, I'm also really pushing hard to see if I can find a way to make that data publicly available so that everybody in the world can go to Artemis in real time and watch what happened in the same format that you can on Apollo in real time. So we'll see how that goes. If it doesn't happen during the mission, then I will work to make it all available after each mission is finished, the way Apollo did, but I won't wait 50 years like I did for Apollo.
All right, got it. Thank you for answering my question.
No problem.
Question from Rayansh. I believe this may be one of my students. Go ahead, Rayansh. Rayansh, do you have a question you'd like to ask?
Okay, looks like we have to go someone else. Again, this one is unmuted, but we cannot hear. Just let's go someone else.
Okay, Risha. Go ahead, Risha.
So like, did any of the Apollo crafts like hit any space debris?
That's a great question. No, the Apollo missions did not hit space debris. The they thought they had on Apollo 13, though, when the explosion occurred on board of that mission. So those of you who aren't familiar with all this detail, on Apollo 13, they went to do a normal procedure to make sure their fuel systems that generated electricity were ready to go, and it caused one of the oxygen tanks to explode, and they barely made it home alive. But when it first exploded, they thought they were actually talking about, they thought they were hit by a micrometeor, but they weren't. It was an explosion. But no, they did not hit any space junk, and but space junk is a lot more abundant now than it was during the Apollo mission. So the chances are getting higher and higher every time there's a mission.
Great. Prisha, would you like to ask your question? Prisha.
Hi, and so my question is, so will Artemis will it be like the replica of Apollo? And also so in Artemis, is there any flaws going on? Because I believe it has been delayed a lot. So is there any flaws in it that's delaying it?
Yeah, it's not a flaw. It's so this isn't like an airplane that had a delay at the airport, and then you can go, what's wrong with this airplane? You have to think of it as this is the first airplane, and there's a delay, and because it's very, very hard to launch rockets, and this particular rocket has a type of fuel, it's hydrogen and oxygen, that has to be stored at such low temperatures. It's so cold that they're extremely finicky and difficult to work with. Things behave differently when it's dropped to the 430 degrees Fahrenheit below, which is the temperature of liquid hydrogen. Now, the reason they use fuel like that is a good one. It's very efficient, and once it's burning, you get a lot of push out of the same amount of material than you compared to some other easier to use fuels. It's also the same fuel that the space shuttle used for part of its mission. So it should be fine, but it's a brand new rocket, and this is the first time they're filling it, and they're finding that they're finding things that they didn't expect to go wrong, but they can tell what's going wrong. It's not because then they need to go back and address what those problems are. So the important thing to remember is that this is all very, very, very hard, and we shouldn't have any expectation that it's just going to happen easily. And we also don't want to get it wrong, right? The consequences of, oh, well, it should be fine, let's launch and see what happens, is a terrible way to proceed when you're doing careful engineering on something that's very high risk, and we'll have people on board soon. So we want to make sure we know how the vehicle works before we go ahead and launch it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. By the way, you guys can all start raising hand, even for other kind of questions as well, not just for this website or Apollo. But the question that the other student just asked related to something I was going to ask you about, I'm always personally amazed how these large, gigantic projects actually get done and actually works. As you said, you just do it once every however many years, and it actually works. So maybe you can talk a little bit about when NASA or other companies build large software systems. We're not going to talk about this whole rocket thing and all, but just the software aspect. What does it take? How do they do it? Because when we start coding, it's just I'm building a game myself. But this is obviously not one person work.
Well, there's a grown-up answer, which is a complicated one about policy and procedure and stuff that's probably not the best to give here. But I think the more fundamental answer is it's done in small pieces that are very well organized between each other. So it's not like one person has to have the whole vision for everything in their heads for it to work. And I'm sure many people here are familiar with what happens when you try to build a big project like that. You wind up throwing the whole thing away because you never get to the finish line because it's just too big and complex. So we divide everything down into doable pieces of work that might still require a large team, but they have a very clear requirements around what it's receiving as an input and what it's providing as an output. There's also the concept of where you are in the stack of technologies. So a stack of technologies is something that I'm sure everybody will learn in any computer science class, where you're not writing machine language code, you're not writing assembly language code. It goes up the stack, to maybe C++ above that, and then some more extrapolated languages on top of that, until you get all the way up where there's a browser, and then there's a JavaScript engine, and it goes all the way up the stack. Because if you know where you're writing in the stack and you have your clear input and output, then everybody can contribute with somebody coordinating all those efforts together. Now, there's also at NASA a concept of how critical software is, and we have a whole classification system on whether or not software is mission critical. And that's a term that we've used in the public, mission critical. The origin of that term is at NASA, where this is software that has to work. It's mission critical that this software works. If it doesn't, people will die. That is the top level of criticality, all the way down into like email systems for office communication. We don't treat that at the same level of criticality. So where, if you're classifying properly and you're spending energy into that, how to test, how thoroughly should you test each system. So a mission critical system that does something simple like manage a life support system, it might technically be simple, but it's going to go through years of testing, and it's going to go through years of flight testing before someone's life depends on it. And they move up the chain of confidence against that criticality to make sure things are going to be safe to use in space. So you can hear in there that there's a lot of process. I really like the confidence growth aspect of how NASA does things. They call it a TRL, a technology readiness level. And there are, I can't remember, I think there's 9 or 10 levels of TRL. And you start with TRL1, and TRL1 is, we think this is a good idea, but it's never flown to space, and we haven't demonstrated that it'll work, and we don't know if it'll, fit, but hey, it's still a good idea. And then you achieve certain goals, and you can demonstrate certain things, and you will move up to TRL2. Until eventually it's flown in space for the first time. I think that's roughly TRL 5 or 6. And then did it work when it was in space? Yep. Okay, maybe TRL 7, it's going to be used again. Until you get all the way up to, it will definitely work in space, and it will definitely perform the way you want it. So you can hear in that, it takes a long time for these things to go to space and come back, etc. And so you might wind up with like for example, the Hubble Space Telescope used a very old microchip for its processor. I think it was an 8086, or it was an 802 or 386. I can't remember now. Like a very old PC processor that they didn't even make anymore for home computers. And that's what they put on Hubble because it was a high TRL level. They knew it was going to be okay in the radiation in space. They knew it was going to work. So you wind up with like older technologies, but very high confidence technologies being used on many missions. And I find it all quite fascinating.
It is fascinating indeed. Yeah. I mean, it's very different from how like Google or, NVIDIA or these companies do things, but it makes so much sense when it's come to like building stuff NASA is doing.
Yeah. So we're, for example, the space station and real-time program I'm working on at NASA, people are using that, and the flight controllers are using that every time there's a spacewalk, and to go back and look at anything they use. And they're starting to use it more and more, and it's moving through the flight controller community in mission control. But we're being careful not to make it critical so that it doesn't become something that has to work during an EVA. So an EVA is a spacewalk or anything like that. It has to still be a nice to have thing to use after you're analyzing something, because if it is deemed critical, it'll suddenly entirely change the structure in which we're able to make that software. So we're trying to have our cake and eat it too, and have it be really useful, but not that useful, not so critical that it's actually mission critical.
A really good question came through the chat from Navia, and it speaks partly, I think, to your work as a space historian, and the amazing thing you did with the audio. Maybe if you could touch on that. She says, or Nadia says, how is it possible to find all these resources, including the dialogue for the Apollo website?
That's a great question. It was very, very hard. That's part of what makes Apollo in real time really good, is that it's all in one place, and it's easily referenceable. So the audio specifically was really, really hard to get. So there's one machine that can play some of this mission control audio. Can you guys all still see my screen? It looks like I'm not sharing anymore.
Yeah, you need to reshare, sorry, because I wanted to make your video
sure.
bigger when you were
Oh,
talking.
good. Okay. I thought my computer was frustrating me, as it usually does when I'm giving a presentation. There's tape recordings of everybody in mission control that was used to try to understand if anything went wrong. Like on Apollo 13, they used these tapes that recorded everybody's voices to determine if anybody had made a mistake, or if there was any indication earlier that there was a problem, like as part of the investigation. And the tapes were put in the National Archives, and the only machine that could play them was the Johnson Space Center in Houston, and the National Archive location was in Maryland. So we're not, for 50 years, these tapes were just in the National Archives, and a huge effort was spent that I was not part of, to get those tapes out, refurbish the tape machine, and digitize those tapes. And we got those tapes digitized, but the machine was still quite flawed, and it introduced all kinds of audio artifacts and speed problems and warbling sounds and all kinds of stuff to the audio. So that's where my small contribution was, to help come up with a way to undo those problems so that the audio could be precisely put into mission time. And I can show you that here. So I have the audio for Apollo 11. And here we are on Apollo 11. Oh, is the crew asleep? Are they asleep? No, they're not. They're not asleep. I was hoping they'd be asleep. So you can see I just jumped into today's time, and it looks like they're almost home. But if you click this mission control audio button, it brings up this panel of everybody sitting in mission control. These are their desks in mission control, and these are who they are and what they do. And you can see who is talking, so you can tune in to any. You won't have to run an SRT or anything. You probably won't be able to hear it over the meeting, but
okay. But remember, we got to get it.
All of this audio is here. So there's 11,000 hours of audio for just Apollo 11 on this website. So you ever wanted to be the flight dynamics officer? Yeah, on Apollo 11, you can literally sit at that console for the whole mission and listen to them doing their jobs.
You know, without having to look at a bunch of numbers.
And this is part of the historical amazingness of what this really does. Is if you put, some boring recording of a flight controller doing some detail in context with the rest of the mission, you can actually see where were they, what were they doing, what part of the flight plan were they running at this time, and then you could more easily understand what is that technical conversation that's happening with that flight controller. Anyway, so that's the kind of mission audio story. And all of this mission audio was actually used in the Apollo 11 movie that Bruce mentioned, to put audio back into the silent footage of Apollo 11, and which I can show you some of that silent footage here. That might not be silent.
Is that close enough?
Yeah, so that's not silent. That's TV footage.
All
Yeah, that's silent footage.
the alignment.
So you can see this is a 16 millimeter like home movie camera style footage. And if you can tell who is this guy, then you can go, well, what desk was he from? And you could go listen to the audio that was recorded from this headset. And this guy in the UK who worked on the film with us named Stephen Slater lip synced up all the moving lips silently with what he was hearing on these loops. And it took him about a year and a half to do that. And all of that material is in this website, and it was used for the Apollo 11 movie. Okay, that was a very long audio story.
I had a feeling that that question might inspire you. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I know we're running out of time already, but I don't know, Ben, if you have another 10 minutes, you will have.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Ruth, let's get a few more questions out.
Sure. Naringa, would you like to ask your question? Naringa.
Does any people see the black hole?
No, you can't see a black hole, but you can, this is a technical answer. But you can see the stuff falling into a black hole because it emits light because it's approaching the speed of light. So there was a photo taken. It's not really a photo, but an image was generated by an international group of researchers just, I think, 2 years ago. When was it now? Last year? Time has no meaning for me anymore with the pandemic. So, but you can look it up, the real image of a black hole. And it looks exactly like the black hole in some of the movies that have come out recently, because those movies have been using physics to try to inform what it would look like. And it turns out the real image is correct.
Great. Chris, what's your question? Chris.
So if the asteroid Apophis came and hit Earth, what would happen? Would it be exactly the same as the dinosaurs, or, and also would we have any chance of surviving?
Yeah, but there's definitely a chance of surviving, and no one knows what would happen. There's computer models and things like that have been done to try to understand what would happen. It all depends on the size of the thing that impacts and the angle of which it hits and the velocity at which it hits. Lots of different things to check out. But you know, if that happens, it's going to be a bad day, and you know, it would be great if we were also living on other planets at the same time that happened, so that we were okay.
Great. Prisha, what's your question? Prisha?
So, basically, have we discovered any planets out of our galaxies? Like the James Webb Telescope, has it discovered any like planets out of our galaxies that we could actually live on?
Not out of our galaxy, but out of our solar system it has. Our other galaxies are too far away to do that kind of detection. But in our own solar system, there have been many, many exoplanets discovered, but we have not discovered any. We have no images of them, but James Webb is going to give us the ability to actually detect what the atmospheres of those planets consist of, to give us for the first time some indication of what they're made out of, so that we could guess as to whether it was an Earth-like place or it was a Jupiter-like place or something else. But there's still a lot to do before we can understand anything like a goal to go somewhere, to go live in another solar system. Right now, we got to focus on this solar system.
Next question from Ali. Go ahead, Ali.
Do you know anything about Kepler 452b? Could we live on Kepler 452b?
That's too technical a question. I don't know anything about that exoplanet. Isn't it Kepler though? Is it Kepler or Kepler?
Kepler.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of like Earth.
Well, maybe it is. I think from what I know, the ones that have been discovered are quite a lot bigger than Earth, and they have a higher gravitational pull than Earth.
Mhm.
But there might be some indication that there's water. Is that the one that James Webb just imaged?
If you search up Kepler 452b, you could actually find a few images.
Okay, well, those are artist renditions. Those are going to be, somebody took a guess at what it might look like.
Okay.
Interesting.
I'm looking at some like right now. I also have another question. It's something about like, does one of Jupiter's moons have more water than Earth?
Yes, Europa. They think it has almost twice as much water as Earth. Isn't that crazy? It's all frozen though. I mean, it might be all frozen, or there might be a super deep under the crust of ice ocean. And that ocean, if it's there, which they think it is, will have more water in it than all the oceans on Earth.
Quick, further to that one, is that including salt water and fresh water on Earth?
Yeah.
Or just all water?
All water.
Okay. Very
Crazy.
nice. Okay, Karim. What's your question, Karim?
My question is, I actually have two questions. The first one is, are there any more Apollo missions? Well, will there be?
So no more Apollo missions. So Apollo is the name of the program where this particular configuration of space vehicles were flying. It's all of those vehicles are not being made anymore, and the only ones remaining are in museums. But we are returning to the moon with new hardware, and that mission is called the Artemis program. And Artemis is named after Apollo's twin sister in Greek mythology. So it's the sister to the Apollo program.
Yeah. Okay, good. A question from Sanchi. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name properly. Sanchi?
It's Dayanchi, and my question is, how were the dust receptacles installed on the Apollo 17 LM floor?
How were the dust, what?
Receptacles.
I'm not sure what that is. I'm sorry, I
Well,
can't
you
answer
can-
that.
Yeah, maybe you can just type the spelling and all that in the chat too, Ben. So
A receptacle.
The dust receptacles?
Yeah.
I don't think it had anything like a dust receptacle, but they definitely had a lot of dust. They dealt with a huge amount of dirt. Let me see if I can find a good picture while we're answering additional questions. So they had to clean the dust, and it got into everybody's noses, and they called it lunar hay fever because their noses started running. And I think it was just after the third EVA. There we go. Look how dirty Gene Cernan is in this picture. He looks like a coal miner.
and this is inside.
This is how much lunar dust made it inside after because they basically take their suits out. You can see them here piled. And look how dirty they are after 3 days on the surface, because this dust is very sharp. It's like little tiny shards of glass that was caught in this fabric. And even today, when these suits are on display at museums, they're dirty looking because they still have lunar dust in them. Dust is a huge problem if we're going to live on the moon for any more than 3 days. And there's a lot of research happening right now to try to understand how to manage the dust. And they call it the dust mitigation problem. So that's a lot of engineering going into that right now at NASA.
Yeah, I mean, I read like one of the things they do for this the suit, like space suit, it's actually considering how to deal with the dust here.
Yeah. Yeah, they've even designed vehicles where the spacesuits, like it's kind of like the ones they used in what was the Mars movie called again with
The Martian?
The Martian, yes. Where you climb into the suit and then it's outside already and it never comes inside. You just kind of dock and then climb out. So they tried that too. All interesting designs.
Cool. We're going to try to do 3 more questions and then we're going to wrap up. Bruce, you want to call 3 more lucky people?
Sure. Let's see. Who hasn't asked any yet? Let's see. How about Kareem from Kareem? And I saw you in the chat, Kareem, but I don't see your hand raised. Let's see. Where are you, Kareem?
Sarah, can you hear me, Sarah?
Yeah, my question was,
why do we have to stay on Mars when really because like when the sun is gonna like erupt, why can't we stay on any other planet in like an other solar system?
Well, maybe by then we can go to other solar systems, because that's in not for billions of years will the sun run out of fuel and expand and consume the Earth. When it does, though, it might be possible that Mars's climate will change to such an extent that it could be a great place to live. By then, we're probably going to be have colonized on Mars for quite some time by then. So, you know, we don't have to live on Mars, but we do have to find another place to live in a, you know, several billion years. When the sun expands and consumes the Earth, we're going to need a new place to live.
Okay, Tanvi, what's your question, Tanvi?
Is it possible to travel to other galaxies or the end of space?
With an infinite amount of time, probably, but it's not practical. Right now, we have no way of traveling to another galaxy. The light from other galaxies takes hundreds of thousands of years to get here, and we can't travel at the speed of light. So even at a quarter of the speed of light, you know, that's 500,000 years to get to another galaxy. And in a spacecraft, you know, that's a long time to be in a spacecraft. So no, we have to make do with where we are, and we can just look at the other galaxies.
Thank you.
Good. And a question from Stacy.
My question was, I know you were talking about like how if you traveled at the speed of light, it would take just the amount of time to like speed up as to slow down. Why can't you just like turn it around and like run it against itself?
Yeah, that's exactly what they do when they need to slow down a rocket. But you can't run the rocket any harder than you did to move, so it takes an equal amount of time. So at the halfway point is when you need to turn around and start slowing down. So you can like accelerate a lot to that halfway point and then accelerate a lot to stop, or you can just keep it a little more even. And you know, it turns out you're spending a lot of fuel to go only a little faster when you have to do that.
Cool. With that, I'm actually going to kind of start wrapping this up. I know, Adeline, you had a question. Maybe you emailed me before this class about your question. Do you still want to ask it? Okay, if you need to raise your hand. So I'm going to ask Ben one question before we finish up. But while he's doing that, I'd love to have everyone put in chat, like, what are the most interesting things you thought that you have learned today? And send it to everyone. I'd love to see like what you felt like you have learned that really excited you. And then Ben, the question I'd love to ask you is, several kids asked us like, how do I become a, NASA engineer? Or maybe I turn that question around a little bit, like, let's say if they're 7 years old, or if they're 10 years old, if they're 15 years old, what do you think they should be learning to maybe get ready for something they're excited about?
Sure. Well, I think the most important thing is to study hard on things you're interested in. So you don't have to, learn things you really don't want to learn, because if you really don't want to learn that stuff, you're never gonna get super good at it, right? So you have to find the things that you really like to do, and then find ways for that thing that you really like to do that might be on the subject of space to be applicable to space. So, you might really like writing stories, for example, and you could go work at NASA and work in a way that lots of people at NASA write stories. They write stories about the missions that are happening, and they try to tell people about how exciting it is. And they're not engineers, they're not computer science people, but they are doing what they know how to do and what they love to do, and they're contributing to the NASA mission and to human spaceflight. So you can do things like that. For engineer specifically, I think it's computer science is a great way to start, where you're learning how to program computers, and then you can get better and better at that, and then eventually go to university for engineering or for computer science and get a degree, and then you can get a job at NASA. But I can't say strongly enough that it's not only engineers at NASA. It's people interested in science. It's people interested in the arts. It's people interested in all kinds of different things. If you can think of it as even the spacesuits, for example, during Apollo, they hired a garment manufacturing company that normally made underwear to actually, they won the contract to make the Apollo spacesuits. So there's people that ran sewing machines that contributed to the space travel of people. And it really takes everybody. There were 400,000 people is the estimate of the number of people that worked on Apollo to make it happen. And that's just so that 12 people could walk on the surface.
Very cool.
Well, it takes everybody.
There is a question on the chat that's getting a lot of vote and feels like needs to be answered. Like people were curious about how long does it take for a mission critical thing to get actually the level 9 you talk about?
Yeah, I don't actually have a number on that one. I would say over 10 years usually. Software maybe less, but hardware that's high TRL has definitely gone to space a few times. Those missions take years to make, so maybe average about a decade for the highest TRL level.
Cool. All right.
So that's why your computer chip is already 10 years out of date by the time it's on your mission.
That is interesting. Like sometimes we say, oh, they're using like relatively older versions of computers, but that's how we know it's reliable. It's been used by so many different people in so many different places. And so.
Yeah, and actually the technology is getting less radiation capable over time because we're making chips with smaller and smaller circuits.
Mm-hmm.
And you might hear the different processes. You'll hear the new AMD CPU uses a 7 nanometer process. That means the wires are only 7 nanometers wide, where an older one might be 30 nanometers wide. And if a cosmic ray goes through that chip, it's going to flip a whole bunch of bits on a smaller chip than it is on a bigger, more robust chip. So that is another reason why older chips actually have a high TRL. It's not just because of time, but if you put a brand new 7 nanometer chip up in space, it's probably not going to do very well with radiation by itself, unless it has some kind of shielding, right? So these are the kinds of things that you have to engineer your way through.
It's fascinating. I mean, I could sit here for like hours and drilling into questions, but I want to thank you again for Ben to come here and share with us not only the website, but all these like really, really fascinating information about space and science. Thank you everyone for your wonderful questions. I'm always amazed how some of our young kids know so much about space science.
Yeah, those are some great questions, some thoughtful questions. It's clear to me that a lot of the people asking questions have thought about this a lot. And that's great. That curiosity, that's what it's all about. And then making stuff. So I'd say if you guys are up for a challenge, go for it and learn your very basic stuff on computer science and programming, and see if you can make something that you think is fun to make, and just keep going from there.
Yeah, very, very true. And I'm also hoping, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of you actually will spend the weekend listening to the website. That's certainly something like I will do if I get a chance to kind of go somewhere and just find some time. It's just something you can put there and listen the whole time, which is truly amazing. All right, thank you very much. And then we do have actually more fun event with something coming up tomorrow. We're going to do, this is like very, very first step of going to NASA. This is like a snap circuit whether you have ever bought this for your kids or anything like that. But we're going to do this tomorrow, and then we have some fun Halloween event coming up again. With that, let me thank Ben again, and thank you, Bruce, for inviting Ben and also for your help in this whole process. And thank everyone for joining.
Well, thanks for having me. It was really nice talking to you all.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ben and Jesse and all the kids that had tuned in from everywhere. That was one of the most amazing conferences I think I've seen with Create and Learn. So great to be here.
Absolutely. That was super fun. Awesome. All right, I'll see you guys. Bye.
Bye.